Shabbat Shalom. Hine matov umanayim shevet achim gam yachad. Hine matov umanayim shevet achim gam yachad. How good it is, how sweet it is to be together on this day. How good it is, how sweet it is to be together on this day. Hine matov umanayim shevet achim gam yachad. Hine matov umanayim shevet achim gam yachad. Now here's a new melody. It's very sweet, and it comes back over and over again. We're going to sing it a lot tonight. Here we go. Ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la. That's basically it. Ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la. One more time. Ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
It is wonderful to be with so many of you here in our sanctuary and also with those who are online with us this evening for Shabbat. This weekend is our first Israel Scholar in Residence weekend, so we are really able to celebrate both Shabbat and Israel together tonight. We'll hear a little later from our Scholar in Residence, Dr. Kenneth Stein. We welcome him from Atlanta. And our weekend is sponsored by the Ahavat Medinat Yisrael Endowment, created by Emily and Sam Zimmern. And the name of the fund, Ahavat Medinat Yisrael, really reflects its purpose, a love for the state of Israel. And tonight, in addition to hearing from our guests, we will also try to infuse our Shabbat with a love of Israel and moments of Israel. Really developing that connection. So I begin with a poem by Alden Solovey entitled Shabbat Settles on Jerusalem. Shabbat settles on Jerusalem like a dove gliding on silent wings. Shabbat settles in my heart, a lover with open arms, embracing my soul with song, wrapped in quiet breathing. I send blessings into the world, light, bread, prayers of peace. As the poet said, we begin Shabbat by sending blessings out into the world, and so we begin with blessings over candles and Kiddush.
There's wax. There we go. This side looks better, perhaps. Aha! Here we go. Let's welcome in the light of Shabbat. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech v'tzivanu lehadlik ner shel Shabbat. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddeshanu b'mitzvotav v'ratzavanu v'shabbat kodsho be'ahava uvratzon hinchilanu zikaron lema'aseh v'reishit ki hu yom techila lemikra'ei kodesh zecher litziat mitzrayim kivanu v'acharta ve'otanu kidashta mikol hamim v'shabbat kodshecha be'ahava uvratzon hinchaltanu Baruch atah Adonai mekadesh haShabbat. Amen.
Wine is a symbol of joy in our tradition, and it's then appropriate at this time in our service to celebrate our joys. So it's become our tradition to share out loud good things that have been happening to you since you were last with us for Shabbat or in this past week, so that we might, as a whole community, be able to celebrate with you. So we're going to invite you to raise your hand and share something good that has happened to you. In our last service, only children shared, but since you're mostly adults, you're going to have to share. Anybody have something good they can tell us about? Yes? Wonderful. Good to be together as a family. Anybody else? Yes? Wonderful. Booster shots for COVID-19. Second boosters. Great. Yes. Wow. Okay, I'm going to repeat that. The hospital has deactivated its emergency command center for the pandemic. That is wonderful news.
Big shehechianu.
That's like a humongous shehechianu. Anybody else? Yes. You also got your booster shots. Wonderful. You found your phone. I am glad that the phone is no longer missing. Yes, Chris. Thankful to be here in person. Thank you. Yes. Wow. Nominated and became the assistant volunteer for the Matthews Police Department. Congratulations. Anybody else? Yes. 17th wedding anniversary tomorrow. Mazel Tov. And I will share that Rabbi Knight and I just returned from our first National Rabbinic Conference in 3 years, and it was wonderful to be together with over 300 Reform rabbis. All right. We take all of those things into our hearts and all the other good things that you're thinking about as we offer a Shechianu, thanking God for enabling us to reach this moment and for being able to celebrate all of those things together.
שהחיינו וקיימנו והגיענו לזמן הזה.
I'm going to invite you for a moment to transport yourselves to Kibbutz Gezer, which is between Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. And I'm going to invite you to sit down on a concrete bench that I mixed the concrete for a while ago, over 20 years ago. I spent 2 weeks living on this kibbutz, and we built this bench. And it was built in the area called the Lecha Dodi corner. And it was built there so that it overlooked the field. And the idea was that you could sit on this bench and look over the field as the sun set. And in that way, kind of relive the experience of the mystics who would go out into the fields to greet the Sabbath bride. So I invite you to imagine yourself on that bench and imagine the sun going down and that glow of light that happens at the end of the day, and see that glow as Shabbat coming into you. And I invite you to have that glow bring you to a little bit more to a state of rest, to allow your thoughts to slow down, maybe turn some of them off altogether, to allow your breath to slow down and your heart rate to slow down, so that we can enter this Shabbat truly as a day of rest.
Lecha Dodi Likrat Kala Pene Shabbat Nekabela Lecha Dodi Likrat Kala Pene Shabbat Nekabela Shamor v'zachor b'dibur echad Hishmianu el hameyuchad Adonai echad u'shemo echad L'shemu tiferet v'litila lecha dodi Likrat Kala Pene Shabbat Nekabela Lecha Dodi Likrat Kala Pene Shabbat Nekabela Likrat Shabbat Lechu v'nelcha Ki mekor haberacha Mirosh mikedem nesucha Sof ma'aseh b'machshavat techila Lecha Dodi Likrat Kala Pene Shabbat Nekabela Lecha Dodi Likrat Kala Pene Shabbat Nekabela Hitoreri Hitoreri Adonai alayich nigla lecha dodi likrat kala pnei Shabbat nekabela lecha dodi likrat kala pnei Shabbat nekabela. Boi v'shalom ateret bala gam besimcha uvetzola toch emunei am segula boi chala lecha dodi likrat kala pnei Shabbat nekabela lecha dodi likrat kala pnei Shabbat nekabela.
I want to invite you to go back to that bench on Kibbutz Gezer and then transport yourself north to the top of Mount Carmel, the top of the Baha'i Gardens, looking out over all of Haifa. And then transport yourself south to Ein Gedi and imagine yourself beside a stream, seeing an ibex climb up the rock. And then further south to the Negev, looking out at the sand and the rock, not seeing any signs of civilization for miles and miles. All of those pieces are scenery in the land of Israel and all part of creation. Baruch atah Adonai ha'ma'ariv aravim. Blessed are you, Adonai, who brings on evening.
Ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la. Ya la 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 la, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto Le'olam Va'ed.
Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel wrote, Israel is a personal challenge, a personal religious issue. It is a call to every one of us as an individual, a call which one cannot answer vicariously. The ultimate meaning of the state of Israel must be seen in terms of the vision of the prophets, the redemption of all. The religious duty of the Jew is to participate in the process of continuous redemption, in seeing that justice prevails over power, that awareness of God penetrates human understanding. Mi Chamocha is our song of redemption, celebrating the redemption of our ancestors from slavery, but also calling us to continue to seek redemption for all.
Mi Chamocha Pailim Adonai, Mi Chamocha Nedar Bakodesh, Nora Tehilot Osei Vele Nora Tehilot Osei Vele Malechutecha Ra'u Vanecha Bokei Ayam Lifnei Moshe Miriam Ze Eli Anu Ve'amiru Adonai Yimloch Le'olam Va'ed Adonai Yimloch Le'olam Va'ed V'ne'amar Kifada Adonai et Yaakov U'galo miyad chazak mimenu Baruch atah Adonai Ga'al Yisrael.
In that pursuit of redemption, we come up against scary things, and we need to seek protection and comfort, and we do that through the words of Hashkivenu.
Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu L'shalom, L'shalom, V'ha'amidenu Shomreinu L'chayim, Ufros aleinu Sukkot Shlomecha, Ufros aleinu Sukkot Shlomecha. Shelter us beneath your wings, O Adonai. Guard us from all harmful things, O Adonai. Keep us safe throughout the night, till we wake with morning's light. Teach us, God, wrong come right. Amen. 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 Vishamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat la'asot et ha-Shabbat lidorotam brit olam Vishamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat la'asot et ha-Shabbat lidorotam brit olam Beni uvein b'nei Yisrael oti le'olam Ki sheishet yamim asa Adonai asa Adonai et ha-shamayim ve'et ha'aretz uvayom hashvi'i shavat vayinafash Vishamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat la'asot et ha-Shabbat lidorotam brit olam Vishamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat.
A Prayer for Peace in the Land of Israel by Devon Spire. Of the Kotel, Rav Kook writes, "There are silent stones, and there are stones which are hearts. But what about the stones in the way of hearts, guarding us with the unmovable hardness that has withstood generations, and yet left the silent ones broken? Take us to a place beyond stones and hearts, where the presence of God embracingly dwells, and where neither mineral or human being stands in the way of that which dwells most high, peace for all of creation." I invite us to use these words of this prayer to enter into the Amidah, the central piece of our service. Tonight we will begin by reciting the opening line together and then continue in silence. In the opening line, we ask God to open up our lips. And in that line, we hear echoes of Spire's prayer, hoping for the stones blocking our hearts to be lifted. Please rise.
Ufi agi Tehilatecha Adonai Sifatai Tiftach Ufi Yagid Tehilatecha.
Whenever we gather, we take an opportunity to think of those in our community who are in need of healing. It's a healing of mind and body, in spirit and soul. And I want to invite you to share out loud the names of people that you're thinking about this evening. Perhaps they're in a hospital room. Perhaps they are at home. Perhaps they're right next to you. Perhaps it's you. Healing and the need for healing and illness and pain and suffering come in all sorts of forms. And we gather those names together as a community and lift all of those names together when we sing the words of Mishaberach. So as the names are scrolling, we invite you to share and add other names as well. And then we'll take all of those names together and sing the words of Mishaberach. As my eyes go around the room, I invite you to share the names out loud or silently in your own heart. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. We invite God's healing energy to fill and heal us to bring us into awareness of all who are in need of healing. And we pray for wholeness and health for those that we love in our community. Baruch atah Adonai, Rofeh HaCholim, blessed are you, O God, who walks with and supports those in need.
Mi sheberach avotenu mekor haberacha leimotenu. May the source of strength, who bless the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say Amen. Mi sheberach imotenu mekor haberacha lavotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shelema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say Amen.
Very soon after I'm going to ask you to take it down just a little. I feel like I'm yelling and I'm barely speaking. All right. Thank you, Natalie. So soon after I was appointed as the senior rabbi of Temple Bethel, I attended the APAC Policy Conference in Washington, D.C., myself and 20,000 of my closest friends. And while I was at the conference, I had the chance to meet for the very first time Sam Zimmern. And we met in a hallway outside of the stadium. I think it's a stadium that we were in. And amongst a sea of 20,000 people, it was so wonderful to meet you, Sam, and to get to know a new congregant of mine at the policy conference, and to know that there were members of the Charlotte community who were as committed to the American-Israel relationship as I am. And it was wonderful to meet you there. But then after arriving to Charlotte, I quickly learned that Sam and Emily, as well as the whole Zimmern family, cared deeply about Temple Bethel, about the Charlotte Jewish community, about the broader city of Charlotte, and about the state of Israel. And Sam and Emily have been sounding boards and advocates and advisors and friends to Anna and to me, as well as a health advisor when I had a real medical concern in Israel, so thank you, Sam. And when it comes to Israel, the endowment that they have created and recently established, the fund, as Rabbi Nichols said earlier, is called the Ahavat Medinat Yisrael Endowment. The Zimmern Ahavat Medinat Yisrael Endowment. The love of Israel endowment, of the state of Israel endowment. So why use the word love? I think it's because Sam and Emily are encouraging us to help ourselves and coming generations to be steeped in a love and affection for Israel, for its history, and to be able to argue the case for Jewish self-determination, to discern the difference between acceptable criticism of Israel and delegitimization, and to be safe and confident in learning every side of a story because of a sheer belief that complexity and nuance isn't an enemy. It makes for better thinking. Their gift will help us learn about the arts and culture and literature and music of Israel, to prepare high school students to go to college, prepared to experience what it's going to be like talking about Israel on college campuses. It already has helped to transform Israel education in our religious school. We've had multiple educators going through your training program, Dr. Stein. But on top of all of that, we have an Elements of Israel class. We have helped to train high school students to be thoughtful about how they're going to experience Israel on campus this next year. And I hope that the measure of our love of Israel can be found in our ability to know Israelis and to dignify the wide number of ways that we can be pro-Israel. May we all find the wisdom, the patience, and strength to listen and to learn. And may the people in the state of Israel be strengthened by the way of our congregation's efforts. Tonight, we are excited to welcome back to Charlotte for the umpteenth time, Dr. Ken Stein. And we're excited to welcome Dr. Ken Stein as our first scholar in residence for this endowment. Dr. Ken Stein earned his undergraduate degree from Franklin and Marshall College and his 2 master's and doctoral degrees from the University of Michigan. And his doctoral work focused on the social economic background of the Jewish-Arab conflict in British Mandatory Palestine. Dr. Stein's CV and his biography is exceedingly long. And I am not going to read it all to you tonight. And you can thank me later. But here's what I do want you to know. The areas of study in terms of political science and Israel studies that he has taught at Emory University, both in the history and the political science departments, that he has used that knowledge to be an author of many books, to be a writer, to be a teacher, a lecturer. He's been a founder of research institutes, including the International Study Center at Emory and the Middle East Research Program and the Institute for the Study of Modern Israel, which our teachers participated in. Dr. Stein has been, as I said, to Charlotte many, many times, and I hope that between tonight and tomorrow morning's Torah study at 9 a.m. and tomorrow evening's program just before the Duke and the North Carolina game, right, which is as complicated as the Israeli-Palestinian issue, frankly, just before, that you find a way, and I'm so appreciative that you're here, to learn, to listen, and to engage with Dr. Stein. It is a pleasure to have you here, Dr. Stein. Thank you.
I'm going to do something highly orthodox, which is in a Reformed synagogue. You just sit down. No, I'm going to talk into this in a second. Pay close and watch what I'm trying to do. Now, this is why the Middle East is important. I believe in geology and geography in teaching the modern Middle East. Tonight's presentation, or drosh for 20 minutes, will deal with American foreign policy toward the Middle East. Now, I don't have a map, so you'll have to bear with me. This is the Straits of Tehran. Straits of Tiran, on one side is Iran, on the other side is Saudi Arabia. Now, there are 1,200 miles between here and there because this is a lot, but the scale isn't exactly right. This is the Bab el-Mandeb Straits. If you go down from Saudi Arabia, you get to the Bab el-Mandeb Straits, you go up to Eilat, and from Eilat, it's a long distance. Again, the legend or the scale isn't the same. You get to the Suez Canal. From the Suez Canal, you go up here to the Black Sea and to Turkey. Now, why does Putin want Syria? Because he needs access, he needs to have a port on the Mediterranean coast. Why does he want to have positive relations with Turkey? So he can go from the Black Sea over here to Latakia, Syria, and if necessary, have access to the Suez Canal. The geography and the geology of the Middle East will not change. It won't change. Doesn't matter whether you have a Democrat or a Republican president. It doesn't matter whether you have a coalition in Israel of 8 or no parties at all. What matters most is who controls these choke points. Straits of Tiran, between Oman and Iran. The Bab el-Mandeb Straits, between the tip of Saudi Arabia and Ethiopia. And can Israel have access to the Gulf of Eilat so it can ship oil, as it did up until June of '67, from Iran to Israel and across the pipeline? American foreign policy since World War II has been predicated on this notion that if the United States doesn't have access to Middle Eastern oil at a reasonable price, the United States cannot have a positive relationship with Arab states that produce the oil. So the United States has, before the end of World War II, taken a policy that essentially says we have to have a policy toward the Arab world that will assure us of access to oil at a reasonable price. And if necessary, we might have to have a relationship with these bunch of Jews that want to create a state for themselves. Now, the State Department in the late 1940s was anti-Semitic. I don't think I'm telling a tale out of school here. There were members of the State Department who were, in the 30s, overtly antagonistic to providing visas and entry passes to Jews who wanted to migrate from Europe. Cordell Hull, amongst many others, was not exactly a great friend of the Jewish people. Loy Henderson, who was at the State Department, actually tried to persuade Truman not to recognize the State of Israel, and the State Department leaned very hard on Truman, including Marshall, not to recognize Israel. So the U.S. relationship with the Middle East has always been one of trying to balance access to Middle Eastern oil at a reasonable price and providing support or a measure of support for the State of Israel as the United States tries to constantly balance those two. Now, one of the reasons the American Israel Public Affairs Committee was established in the early 50s was the fear that the balance would be pulling too much toward the Arab side of the equation. State Department officials would tell you over time that American foreign policy had to find a way not to condone Israel's behavior in all things Israel did, but at the same time provide for Israeli security. So the way out that most presidents found is, I will, as Obama said, I have Israel's back. But in the front, Obama would say, but Israel has to have a two-state solution, and stop doing what it's doing in the territories. So Obama wasn't, of course, the first one to do that. Carter did it before him, and Bush 1 and 2 did it before him, and Clinton did it. Most presidents have tried to tell the Israelis, you're going to have to find some sort of way to return those territories taken in 1967. Yes, we know you want to exchange the territory for a measure of peace or security. But we believe in the meantime, you have to make the lives of the Palestinians better. Every president of the United States has said, I've got Israel's back. Now, Eisenhower did it a little bit less than Truman. Kennedy did it reasonably well. Johnson certainly did. Nixon didn't particularly like his relationship with the Jewish community in North America, but he managed to recognize Israel's moxie, and he was there, even with a delay of supply, during the 1973 war. Ford certainly was a friend. Carter was different than all other presidents, because what Carter wanted to do, and here I'm asking you for a moment to step aside from Camp David, what Carter wanted to do was to assure the Saudis that the United States would cede to Palestinian self-determination in order to assure the United States there would not be another oil embargo. This was Brzezinski's philosophy in his advice to Jimmy Carter. And Carter relied upon Brzezinski primarily for his foreign policy advice. Carter was a governor of Georgia, like many other governors who become president, don't come to the White House with a lot of foreign policy experience. I mean, when you think about it. Candidates for office who go through Washington have a tendency to understand the allocations process, the lobbying process, what's necessary to be done in the Middle East. Biden comes to office as the only president of the United States who's got 36 years of Washington experience and served on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. I mean, you don't have to give Biden a map of the Middle East. He can take out a napkin and he can draw it, and he probably will draw it to scale a lot better than I did with these chairs and bench. The Middle East, as far as the United States is concerned, has always been trying to balance this. And to one degree or another, every president has moved in one direction or the other. Trump went all the way to one side, toward the Israeli side of the equation, in part driven by the evangelical consciousness of his vice president, Pence. But also he was a believer that Israel needed to be defended in a constantly changing, more unpredictable Middle East, where Arab states were beginning to implode. Gets me to my second point. After I talk about geology and geography, that's really the third point, and talking about the balancing of American foreign policy. When you make foreign policy for a region, you have to take into account who is in the region and what the region's political culture is. You know, we learned in Iraq and Afghanistan we cannot create democracy in regions of the world where the institutions aren't prepared to accept the consciousness that individuals should be citizens and not inhabitants. To be a citizen of a state, you have rights, privileges, obligations. The state has rights, privileges, and obligations. When you are an inhabitant, you don't have rights, privileges, and obligations, and the leadership, the autocracies, don't have an obligation toward you. I would submit to you that most of the political leaders of the Middle East, the Arab Middle Eastern leaders, and I would certainly argue the Iranian leaders as well, I'll leave Turkey out for a moment, most of the Middle Eastern leaders are autocrats. They may have parliaments and they may have elections, but that doesn't mean they have to listen to those parliaments and those elections. I was an observer to the 1996 Palestinian parliamentary and presidential elections. I ran around Ramallah for a day and looked at 22 places where Palestinians were pridefully electing 88 members of a parliament and a president. And everyone believed that out of Oslo, if the Palestinians could have elections and they could have a parliament of their own, they'd be on the road to self-determination, except they didn't realize that Arafat never changed his stripes. So the parliament is elected, he's elected president, and he essentially tells the parliament, I'm not going to listen to what you're going to do anyway because I control the security services. I put more stake in Arafat not allowing Palestinians to really engage in self-determination as an obstacle to moving negotiations forward. I put much more credibility on that than I do on Rabin's assassination. Much, much, much more. So when you deal with the Middle East, the United States has to understand who's governing in the region, what the political culture is, and can you really, from Washington, impose solutions to regions of the world that may not have a history or a tradition of it. Now, it doesn't mean regions of the world can't learn or can't change or can't understand what civil society and civic culture is, but it takes generations to do that. We became enamored in this country with this notion in the 70s and 80s and 90s that if countries had elections, parliamentary elections, that somehow that would be the first step toward democracy. The key is not the first election. The key is, do the people who win the first election, if they lose the second one, will they step aside to the people who replace them? And the answer is usually not. American foreign policy to the Middle East in the last 5 years has been one of America taking a look at itself in the mirror and saying, I'm not certain we can stay here much longer. It's just too costly. We thought we could overthrow Saddam, toss out the Ba'ath Party, and bring to power people who would represent local interests. Well, they did, their own, but not necessarily the interests of the state until they first could take care of themselves. So we didn't do such a good job in Iraq. We could not plant Jeffersonian democracy in Iraq, and we certainly learned we couldn't do it in Afghanistan. Do you really think you're going to do it in Ramallah? No matter how enamored you may be, those in this audience who believe that a solution to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict will change the nature of how the Arab world or how the Palestinians look at Israel, I hate to bring this to your attention. The chances are pretty slim. The Palestinians right now don't have institutions of governance that are capable of negotiating with a measure of trust that they can convey to the Israelis on the other side. Forget the settlements for a moment. Just forget the settlements. Right? If a Palestinian leader comes forward and says, you get out of the territories taken in 1967, we'll end the conflict with you, we'll give up the right of return, we'll establish a demilitarized Palestinian state, we'll have a parliament, and in 20 years, you can decide whether you want to withdraw from the Jordan River Valley in terms of security. Now, if you're an Israeli prime minister or a member of an Israeli parliamentary coalition and you were to hear that, you would go, excuse me, do I need a hearing aid? It doesn't mean it's not possible, I would suggest to you right now it's not plausible. So, doesn't matter really how many times this or that administration says it's in favor of a two-state solution. You still have to go from A to B to C to D in order to make it happen. You have to go from enmity and a lack of trust to pre-negotiations to a willingness to give up something cherished in order to reach an agreement. You have to make political compromise. I don't think Israelis, unless they know exactly what the outcome might look like, will be willing to put up their hand and say, sure, we'll allow a Palestinian state to exist in the West Bank, because I think they're very fearful of what might happen to that state, because they have Gaza as an example of withdrawing from Gaza in 2006, and see what happened to it, became Hamas land. I'm 75. It's about 7:30 in the evening on my life clock. It's also 50 minutes before the UConn game. I've studied this pretty much my entire life. I have never seen the Palestinian political community more dysfunctional and more divided, not only geographically, politically, than it is today. And you don't have to believe me. All you have to do is read the Arabic press and Palestinian Arab writers who are indicting their own institutions. Now, Washington may say, and the EU may say, and organizations in the United States that raise money based on a two-state solution as the outcome, they may say that will happen. Where are you going to get the $2 billion a year to provide the funding for Palestinian economic infrastructure? Who's going to pop for that? People don't talk about the tachlis of reaching a two-state solution. So while it's relevant politically to talk about it, and maybe even necessary to keep a measure of unity within the Democratic Party, and maybe even amongst Republicans as well, I think it's sort of like saying we can make democracy work in Iraq and Afghanistan when the institutions and the populations are not particularly ready to see it happen. American foreign policy has become the domain of many more people than just 100 members of the Senate and 435 members of the Congress. American foreign policy become the domain of the blog, of social media, of the 724 news cycle. Rabbi, with your permission, I'd like to say a Misha Beirach for the Ukrainian people. America still has to deal with autocrats. We still have to manage a foreign policy where we don't want very much to be exposed like we were from 2001 to 2020-21. We still have to worry about Middle Eastern oil, even though the United States is much more independent of Middle Eastern oil as a source. We still know what the absence of oil from Russia has upon the United States when you have a president who releases oil from the strategic reserve. What has happened since World War II is the international community has become much more global. If someone sneezes in Vancouver, Canada, someone catches a cold in Singapore. That's the nature of the global economic order. We learned during the pandemic what supply chain problems were. If this didn't point out to us that we cannot act as we did and enter World War I on behalf of the Allies, or enter World War II because we wanted to defeat fascism in Europe and defeat a dictatorship in Japan, we have military capability. But if you get into an area, can you get out without breaking the egg? We have to have military strength for deterrence. So one of the reasons now that the United States has a strong relationship, or a stronger relationship with Israel than it did 70 years ago, is because the countries in the Middle East that surround Israel are fragmenting. Their demographies cannot meet the economic inabilities of the countries to produce sufficient amounts of whatever it is for the population growth. Don't believe me? Read the Arab Human Development Reports published by the UN. I mean, it's all documented. So the United States has to rely upon people it can trust. Even if the United States didn't have an emotional or an ideological connection to the state of Israel, freedom, democracy, a society built on immigrants and dynamism and freedom and liberty, Israel is and is becoming, or is reinforcing, the status of being America's aircraft carrier in the Middle East. It's no coincidence that this past week, and I'll end with this, that there was an extraordinarily important summit, or several summits in Israel. Bahrain, the UAE, the United States, Israel, some other Arab states attending. But it took place in Israel. If I had said that was a possibility in 2011, you would have laughed at me like I would have laughed at me if I had said during my first semester at Emory in 1977 in January, by the end of this year, the Egyptian leader is going to fly to Jerusalem and say, we'll make peace with you. You would have looked at me like, we're going to take your degree away from Michigan, we're going to make you take a degree from Ohio State. You can't predict this region of the world. You just have to be prepared for the unexpected. And you can't do it virtually with any region of the world. You know, is it China rising? Are we really pivoting toward Asia? And if we do that, don't we have to have allies in the Middle East whom we can rely upon should we need to? Or that we do already? The geography of the Middle East has remained the same. The geology has remained pretty much the same. If you didn't have petrodollars coming from oil, Iran would not have a toxic foreign policy because it wouldn't have had the dollars to spend on being toxic. Let's be serious about this. So the geology and geography matter. Knowing what your personal or your national limitations are and what you think you can do and what can actually occur. Most of what changes occur are going to have to change from the region itself, and then you can be assertive and you can be a mediator and then you can help. Middle Eastern peace didn't come because America asked for it. I'm talking about Middle East peace between Egypt and Israel. It came because Begin and Sadat wanted it. They wanted it because it fit both of their national interests. When you can say that the Palestinians and the Israelis both want an agreement between them or a peace treaty between them because they both need it and they both want it, and they both recognize the legitimacy of the other, then the United States can be of assistance. Sam Lewis, the former ambassador of the United States to Israel, is quoted at a conference in Miami sometime in the mid-90s, Sam said, "The United States can't want an agreement in the Middle East more than the sides want it." So I don't care how many times people stand up and say we need a two-state solution. Maybe we do. But then you talk about, is it really possible? It's not possible until the respective sides say they want it. And right now they both don't want it because the other is not an existential threat to the other. American foreign policy is bounded by these choke points, geology and geography, and changing political landscape. If anyone comes to you and tells you, I know what American foreign policy is to the Middle East, step back for a moment and think about these factors. And then you'll be able to interpret just about anything you read in any daily newspaper or listen to on the telly any evening of the week. Rob, I thank you and your staff for allowing me to be here this weekend. Thank the Zimmers for their support of topics that relate to Israel. I hope you'll join us tomorrow morning when I'll talk a little bit about the making of the state. I can assure you that tomorrow morning we don't have to worry about Tar Heels and Blue Devils. That'd be very different than tomorrow night. So Shabbat Shalom. Thank you again for having me. Sorry about the bench. This is what's going on.
Dr. Stein, there was only one change that I would have made to what you said, which is the Ohio State University. Just want to make sure that, it's very important. I lived in Cincinnati for 5 years, and I heard that a lot, and we have a tenured professor at the Ohio State University here tonight, so I would have all sorts of problems if I didn't mention that. We want to, whether it's a two-state solution or one-state solution, one of the things that we do hope for always in our tradition is the value of shalom, of peace. It's our greatest prayer, it's our greatest hope. And the words of Aleinu L'Shabeach remind us of a day, hopefully, when we in the world can come together and be more than the separate parts. And so we rise now with the words of Aleinu L'Shabeach in that prophetic hope of possibility and peace.
Aleinu l'shabeach la'adon ha'kol, la'teit gidula li'yotzer bereshit, shelo asanu kegoye ha'aratzot, velo samanu kemishpechot ha'adama, shelo sam chelkenu kahem, v'gor aleinu kechol hamonam, va'anachnu koreim, umishtachavim umodim, lifnei melech, malchei hamelachim, hakadosh baruch hu, v'ne'emar v'haya Adonai, lemelech al kol haaretz, bayom hahu, yeh Adonai echad, u'shemo echad.
Please be seated. As is our custom in our congregation, we think of those who have died recently, those who died at this season in years past, and those whom we have drawn into our hearts as our own. In many ways, the words of Kaddish at home, the Mourner's Kaddish, is a prayer about thanking God for people who have made an impact on our lives. And in many ways, the Mourner's Kaddish is a reminder of those who gave their lives for also great causes, and sometimes they gave their lives because of horrible events in the world. And every time our congregation says Mourner's Kaddish, we think of recent events like what's happening in Ukraine, or Ethiopia, or Yemen. We think of those who died in the Shoah and the Holocaust, of our American servicemen and women who gave their lives for our freedoms, and those who died defending the state of Israel. It's our custom to rise when the names of your loved ones are read. Recently, we have had the deaths of Gary Waller and Jerry Bernstein, whose funerals will be coming up in the near future. And we are in a period of Shloshim for Joshua Emil Blyer, Robert Chamow, June Owen Perry Flick, Linda Garreau, Mona A. Lieberman, Ann McDonald, Lloyd E. Merkelson, Joel Sheldon Rudick, Thomas Ryan, and Max Shore. We mark with sympathy and sadness the yahrzeits, the anniversaries of the deaths of Henrietta Alter, Sam Anoff, William Ben Applebaum, Ethel Applebaum, Thomas Barrett, Janet Levin Block, Louis Borrow, Rinky Cardoza, Arthur Cardoza, Natalie Chesler, Jenny S. Cohen, Herbert Seymour Cohen, Elaine Selma Kojak, Maggie Cook, Mildred Deitch, Albert Edelston, Bernard Eisner, Kalman Furster, Harold Feuerstein, Max Fleur, Al Freiberg, Devorah Friedman, Lillian Finnell Freeman, Harry Friedberg, Andrew Nove Gardner, Arthur Gaines, Joseph Geller, Sadie Leah Gerber, Gazelle S. Goldstein, Kaya Golinsky, Herman Greenblatt, Mary Gross, Robert Herman, Harry Jackaway, Harris Kahn, Ruth Lakin, Mortimer Levitt, Kalman Levine, Raoul Lewin, Max Moss, Helen Mayer, William McGuire, Donald Mallins, Gertrude Book Mandelbaum, George Margolis, Edith Martin, Michelle Miller, Sylvia Nalaboff, Alberto Niego Leon, Ann Knorr, Bonnie Pearl, Rivi Pfeffer, Anna Pointer, Stanley Resnick, Maura Resnikoff, Harry Rosenthal, Gertrude K. Salvin, Francis Schuler, Jacob Schwartzberg, Bertha Seaman, Leo Shane, William Julian Shahan, Louis S. Buddy Simon, Calvin Singer, Israel Smith, Jean Smolin, Arnold Spatz, and Bernice Stern. Zichronam livracha. May all of their memories be for a blessing as we rise as one congregational family to support those who are observing Shoshim or Yahrzeit and those who have no one to support them at all. Continue with the words of Kaddish Atom on page 598. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah Be'alma divrach irute v'amlich malchute. B'chayechon uv'yomechon uv'chaye dechol Beit Yisrael. Ba'gala ubizman kariv v'imru. Amen. Yehi shmei rabba mivarach leolam olamei olamaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh. V'yithadar v'yithalev v'yithalal shemei dekudesha barichu. Le'elam min kol birchata v'shirata. Tush bechata v'nechemata. Da'amiram be'alma v'imru. Amen. Yehi shlama rabba min shemaya. V'chaim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. V'imru. Amen. Oseh shalom bimromav. Huya aseh shalom. Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. V'imru. Amen.
Oseh shalom bimromav. Huya aseh shalom. Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Ve'imru. Amen.
Please be seated. Tomorrow morning, the Israel study sessions will continue with Dr. Stein at 9 o'clock in the morning. We'll have bagels. This is the first Torah study that we've had in person since March of 2020, which is a big deal for us. So thank you. And our community conversation tomorrow night at 7 p.m. I don't know if you know this, but Passover is coming up. And it's just wonderful to be able to celebrate Passover. We have the Women's Chocolate Seder is back on Sunday, April 3rd. We've got a Men's Seder with the Brotherhood on Tuesday, April 12th. We have the second night Seders with the families with young children at 5 p.m. and then with older children and adults at second, or Young at Heart, second night Seder on April 16th at 6 p.m. You can register for all of our Seders on our Shul Cloud calendar. And Canada, do you want to give a Shabbat update?
Sure. So Oneg is back, as you've heard. We, in fact, have an Oneg tonight. Tonight, before the 6 o'clock service, was the first pre-neg since March of 2020. So I know, it's very exciting. All of the usual things were out. So next month at that 6 o'clock service, the first weekend in May, Kihilat Shabbat, which is a congregation-wide first Friday 6 p.m. service, do come early for pre-neg. Saturdays are also back in the building every single Saturday. So you're welcome to join us for services when there's a bar or bat mitzvah in this room, or in the chapel if we have a Saturday morning without a bar or bat mitzvah. And of course, live stream for all Saturday morning 10:30 services will continue. Torah study tomorrow is very special, and Rabbi Knight has told you about that. But beginning the following week, Torah study will be hybrid. So you're welcome to join here in person or continue to join via Zoom.
Great. We're going to conclude with Yerushalayim Shel Zahav. And we hope that everyone will sing along. And we hope that Hashanah Haba B'Yerushalayim, that we have an opportunity to be together always at Passover and beyond in Jerusalem.
Avir harim tzalu kayain vereach oranim nisa beruach arba'im im kol pa'amonim uvtardemat ilan va'even shvuya b'chaloma ha'ir asher badad yoshevet ובליבה חומה ירושלים של זהב ושל נחושת ושל אור עלו לכל שירייך אני כינור ירושלים של זהב ושל נחושת ושל אור עלו לכל קטונתי מצעיר בנייך ומאחרון המשוררים, כי שמך צורב את השפתיים, כי נשיקת שרף. אם אשכחך ירושלים, אשר כולה זהב, ירושלים של זהב ושל נחושת ושל אור, הלא לכל שירייך אני כינור. ירושלים של זהב ושל נחושת ושל אור, הלא לכל שירייך אני כינור.
Shabbat Shalom. We look forward to seeing you in the David Silverman Social Hall for Oneg.
Thank you, Kate.
Galen, thank you. How are you doing? How's the kiddo? Yeah? He's almost... yeah, I know. You know, I have to tell you that, like, people talk about the terrible twos, but for us it was threes. That, like, the threes were, like, far worse than two.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, Mommy does come back. Oh, no, that's... That's awesome. I know. Well, you know what I would say is that, but you know, two when they have like a conniption, it's like amateur hour. But by three, they've like professionalized, and you know they've like 10,000 hours, like Malcolm Gladwell blinked, like you know. So like when they throw it at 3 or 4, it's like, oh my god, this is happening. Yeah, the whole store is now looking at me. The whole airplane can hear my kid. Right, like that happens.